You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now present the Health Hub, hosted by Kathy Biasi.
Welcome to the Health Hub on Radio Maria Canada, exploring cutting-edge health and wellness information and therapies, helping you to take your health to the next level. I am your host, Kathy Biasi, and I'm a holistic nutritionist and a professional cancer coach. On today's show, we are revisiting the topic of fascia with a focus on what healthy fascia feels like, what causes it to become unhealthy, and how fascia treatment and therapy can improve its health, with our guest, Julia Blackwell. Julia is a fascia release practitioner, educator, and creator of the Fascia Remedy. She was born with severe nerve damage in her right shoulder, and after years of being told her condition would never improve and feeling no lasting relief from any treatments, she was introduced to a unique type of fascia release bodywork. In just 3 months of this fascia-specific work, she saw more improvement in the feel and function of her arm than she had in 16 years of traditional treatments. Her experience catapulted her into learning everything she could about fascia, the critical roles it plays in our movement and overall health, and how to restore it. After learning multiple modalities and working with clients for 12 years, she formulated her own approach for bodywork and foam rolling work called the Fascia Remedy. Using this methodology, she has been able to solve her own bouts of low back, knee, and neck pain in a matter of days, as well as helping others quickly alleviate pain, restore movement, and perform at their best. Julia has captivated a community of thousands with her unique bodywork, her fresh take on foam rolling, and her approach to discovering the root source of their pain. Her combination of fascia release, postural alignment, and mindset magic has earned her the nickname, the Pain Relief Wizard, from her community of both professional athletes and everyday movers. We talk about how stress impacts the health of our fascia, what are the signs of unhealthy fascia, the connection between fascia and hydration. And this I really found to be a fascinating topic. Very interesting conversation with Julia. I hope you can continue to join us. We will be back in just a few minutes to speak with her.
You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now continue with the program, The Health Hub, hosted by Kathy Biasi.
Welcome back to the Health Hub, everybody. Today's show has been recorded. No opportunity for calling in. Please do follow us on our social sites. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we are at the Health Hub RMC on those locations. Julia, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kathy. Thanks so much for having me on.
We have had a couple of guests talk about fascia, more in the technical space, and I think that this is going to be a very great show to bring all that into the practical space. What I would love for us to talk about first is your journey into this space. I know you've had, as with many of us that get into the healthcare integrative space, a story to tell. And then let's talk about, what fascia is. So first things first, introduce yourself and what you do and the whole 9 yards.
All right. Well, yes, I'm Julia Blackwell. I am your friendly neighborhood fascia release practitioner and foam rolling instructor. I got into fascia and working with it very specifically back in 2011, but my journey really started from birth. So I was almost a 10-pound baby. I got stuck in the process of being born, and In that attempt to pull me out, the doctor ended up stretching and tearing all the nerves in my right shoulder. So I grew up, yeah, super fun introduction to this world.
And your poor mom.
I know she's 5'4" and real tiny. I'm so sorry that that happened. But yeah, I grew up going through, standard Western medicine treatments. I did have a surgery at 4 months old to see if that would help bring my arm back online, which it did, but still it left me with a lot of limited mobility and incessant tightness. So I went to occupational therapy. I went to multiple doctor's visits. It seemed like every 6 months or so I was checking in with someone, but no matter who I saw in that realm, they all told me that one, this issue I was having was never going to get any better. And then two, if anything, it was only going to get worse, which is real lighthearted things to tell a tiny child.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I ended up moving out to Boulder in 2011 in Colorado that I met someone who did a fascia-specific type of bodywork. And growing up, I had done just about anything you could think of, even though I wasn't seeing any lasting results from anything. So I had tried massage therapy, chiropractic, acupuncture, anything that you can think of. For the most part, I tried it. I bought all the tools that I thought might help. I laid on what probably was 100 tables for treatments, and nothing seemed to make a lasting impact. But then I tried this type of fascia release, and it completely blew my mind and changed my life. So I felt more impact in the feel and function of my arm in 2 to 3 months of doing this work than I had in literally my entire life of doing.
How limiting was your shoulder injury?
So it affected me in a couple of different ways, mostly in the shoulder. So I couldn't lift my arm up over my head. I had a really tough time straightening my elbow even. So for the most part, I had held it close to my body and kept it there for the most part. I did absolutely everything with my left hand and mostly completely disconnected from my right arm and pretended it didn't exist. I looked at it as a part that had betrayed me and it was essentially useless. And it wasn't until I did fascia release that suddenly that mobility started to be unlocked, muscles started to fire again, and just my general strength and movement was so greatly improved. It's still a work in progress, but nothing has ever made an impact before or since in the way that this type of work did and does.
Are you left-hand dominant then? Is that a silly question to ask?
Yes, I mean, mostly because I have no idea. I really didn't have the opportunity to see which arm was my dominant arm. So yes, I'm left-handed.
Okay. Sorry for the interruption. It's an interesting story. Did it impact, the limitation in your shoulder? Did it throw off all the other balances, spine, hips, things like that? Or was it just stationary into the shoulder?
Oh, as I'm sure we'll dive into, there's really no way for one part of your body to be limited or affected without it affecting just about everything else. So I did find as I started to unwind all of these spots of fascial tension, all of these poor movement patterns, that there was a lot of other things that were greatly impacted. And even since that really incredible experience that made me turn hard into the world of fascia and made me understand ooh, this is the thing that I want to do and help other people with. I've had other bouts of pain. I've had bouts of low back pain, of neck pain, of knee pain, and I've been able to solve all of those things really quickly on my own by releasing fascia with a foam roller. It's like as soon as you understand the principles of how it works and how it needs to be changed, I've been able to help what is surely an unwinding pattern from my arm. I've been able to tackle all of those various things that pop up because pain happens. That's life.
That is life for sure. So let's then take that step in the direction of you explaining to us what fascia is and why it is so impactful on our health.
Yeah, so fascia is the biological fabric that holds all of the material and water in our body together. Even though I wouldn't say this is fully accurate, one of my favorite analogies for the initial visual is to think of it like plastic wrap that wraps around every single thing in our body. So every muscle fiber, every muscle group, every bone, organ, nerve, blood vessel, it is how we have our shape, our structure, or you can call it posture, and our texture. So if it were to magically disappear out of your body, you would go melting to the floor in a pile of bone fragments and goo. Where on the flip side, if everything else except your fascia were to magically disappear out of your body, you would largely look like you. That's how imperative it is to maintaining that structure and texture. But it does so much more than that. It's what allows our muscles and our joints to glide. It is how we keep all of our tissues hydrated. It's how we absorb shock. It's how we interpret how much force and direction to use through proprioception. The list goes on. So I think most simply you can think of it as this is the three-dimensional plastic wrap suit that is going to hold everything in place, but also then affect the function and placement of everything that it wraps around.
But it's not inert, is it? It's not just like a saran wrap that just it's a living tissue. Tissue? Would you consider it a tissue?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So
that's come a long way, that understanding, right? Because I think when we talked off air, we had another guest, a few years on the show. And he talked about how doctors used to just peel it off and throw it away. So,
yes, that's absolutely right.
and so what do we know now that we didn't know like as recently as 20, 25 years ago?
Yeah, well, one of the issues as well as throwing it in the garbage is that living fascia and cadaver fascia look very different. So cadaver fascia looks like a lot of little spider webs. It's very much like that, maybe more like that plastic wrap analogy where it's this spider web fuzz that goes around everything. And so they were clearing it off because they didn't really understand what it was doing. But fascia is mostly water. It's a very structured water within the collagen and elastin fibers that make up our fascia. And so when it's alive, it's conducting so much communication through that water because those signals are electrical and messages travel really quickly through water. And so it's doing so much more with that hydration element, with that shock absorption element, and with that proprioceptive element when it's alive. And we've only recently started using the right technology to see what fascia is doing under the skin.
So when you're working with people, we're going to be talking about manipulating it and your active way of stretching out fascia, I guess, or releasing fascia is the right word. Obviously, hydration is important, but is there an area of nutrition that you also work upon with the people that you are trying to help? Is there an area of nutrition that you find impactful for these people, for all of us?
Well, I would certainly recommend that you put more water-rich foods into your body, and that's usually in the form of fruits and vegetables, because fruits and vegetables have a specific type of water in them. Again, it's that structured water, if you will. It's also been called EZ water that's more easily absorbed into your body. And if you want to drink more water, which I certainly recommend, we all likely need to drink a little bit more water, but it's really more than just chugging an extra water bottle per day. We have to be moving and we have to be releasing our fascia for that hydration to get to the right places. So fascia has been called a water irrigation system, where they've looked at it close up and you can literally see the little beads of water traveling along the fascial fibers going to all of the places that it needs to go. And that's not going to happen if you are sitting at your desk. So simply adding another water bottle to your day while you're sitting at a desk is more likely a recipe that you're going to be going to the bathroom every 30 minutes. That water is not actually going to get out into the fascia, into the places that it needs to go. So eating more of that structured water can help, but ultimately we're getting that nutrition, that cellular nutrition from health in our fascia, maybe even more so than our food, although that's definitely a different topic. And I have my own opinions about nutrition, but it's not necessarily a part of how I work with people besides giving them some basic recommendations.
What would be telltale signs that fascia is not as healthy as it should or could be?
If you have any type of aches or pains, that is absolutely sign number one. So whether it's, oh, I just feel a little, my back feels a little stiff in the morning, all the way to the end of the spectrum where you have chronic pain that's really intense on a daily basis. Anything along that spectrum is absolutely fascia related. You may also feel like you're very injury prone, you're chronically dehydrated, you feel just heavy and sluggish, or if you have any mobility issues where you don't feel like you can get as low in your squat or reach as far over your head as you used to, those are also signs.
But some of these are, okay, so if you've had an injury or you have arthritis, let's do arthritis because it's something that I am working through to try and get low in my squats. Can increasing or making the health of the fascia in and around my knee overcome like the swelling and the arthritic pain that I have in it?
Yes, absolutely. So arthritis is technically defined as inflammation and stiffness around a joint. I think people have started throwing it out as a term to use for degeneration of a joint when that's not accurate. And so if it were degeneration where something was actively going down, 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 that would be harder to reverse. Although, again, most of the time it's based on where your alignment is. Something is degenerating because there's a different wear and tear pattern happening on that side of your body or that joint. That's kind of a different tangent. But with general inflammation and stiffness, if you can release fascia around that area or release it where, more accurately, where is contributing to that inflammation and stiffness, you're going to get hydration to go back into that spot. You're going to get space around the knee, and that's going to help carry inflammation out and improve the glide of both that joint and the muscles around it.
Well, that is a very promising thing for many, many people. I grew up in a time where a lot of us did, where you don't work through the pain. We've been told not to work through the pain. Fascia work is not a massage, is it? It's because I have done fascia work. It is not pleasant. Ever. I don't, there's just no fascia work that isn't like an ouchie. I'm sorry, I'm just going through this in my head. Where is that intersection between pushing and doing damage around joints?
Yeah, well, I always recommend to stay at least 3 or 4 inches away from a joint when you're working on tissue around it. But you're exactly right in that healthy fascia doesn't hurt. So when you get on a spot that's very restricted, it's very dehydrated, it's going to have a lot of sensation to it. That's one of the first things I hear whenever someone does a foam rolling technique that I recommend in my specific way for the first time. They're like, what the what? This hurts so much.
Absolutely.
Like, because we're in a space that likely has not been released or worked on in a long, long time. However, no change can happen in the body without the nervous system saying that it's okay. So we want to find a way where we can keep the intensity in which we're doing fascia release or foam rolling to about a 6 or 7 at its max. When you start pushing upwards of that 8, 9, 10 out of 10, I guarantee you're unable to breathe fully through the abdomen. You're unable to do the active movement, which is the most imperative part, or you're scrunching and you're tensing other parts of the body, which is the opposite of what we want, right? So finding that 6 to 7 at the maximum amount while you're still able to breathe fully and move slowly and with intention is the sweet spot. And sometimes that takes time. So maybe you have to stick to a 4 or a 5 for a little bit until your body gets used to that sensation, and then you slowly can build up from there.
When you're an athlete, when you're working out, when you are, doing small injuries to your body, There's always going to be an ouchy area, isn't there?
Yeah, with sports specifically, or, athletes, you're likely doing the same type of movements over and over and over again. And that's one of the biggest things that actually causes fascia to tighten or in a specific pattern or become a little bit more unhealthy, because our bodies were made to do all movements and all ranges of motion. And all of us get stuck in these patterns, myself included, where we do the same things over and over again. Maybe we're sitting for really long periods of the day. That's a pattern. Or we're doing squats. And maybe, if you're a CrossFit athlete, you might be doing 150 squats or more on a weekly basis. That's a repetitive pattern. So you're likely going to continue to find things that are tight. Although I will say, with consistency of releasing fascia, it's going to be less and less intense. Or you might feel a lot of sensation right after your workout, and then it's going to go back to being way less faster because of the consistency with which you're working with fascia.
So if you continue to work on the health of, if you're an athlete you don't even have to, athlete is maybe too narrow of a word. If you're someone who does the same type of exercise, as you were mentioning, continuing to work on your fascia as part of an exercise program or a stretching program, it sounds like can almost catapult you into a better space. You're able to do more. Conversely, if you're an athlete and you're not taking care of the fascia, I'm assuming it can be limiting to the top shelf that you can get to.
Absolutely. If your body doesn't have access to a full range of motion, it doesn't have access to its full strength. If you don't have full hydration, that's going to impact your recovery times. It's going to impact how you feel. There's a pretty big step up that happens when you start taking care of your tissue. It's not all about how much can you lift, how hard can you go. I think the top athletes know there's a lot of time that needs to be put into working on the body and maintaining mobility and hydration.
The connection with hydration, I had no idea. I have to be perfectly honest. I find that very fascinating, that it is so imperative to getting hydration throughout your body. We're going to take a quick break. This is, Julia, we did go off on a tangent here, but I think it's a really interesting conversation. Everybody, when we come back, we're going to talk about some techniques. As I said, they're a little bit intense, but with some techniques that Julia uses, and we're going to actually also talk about the implications of stress on fascia health. We'll be back in just a few minutes, back to talk with Julia.
You are listening to The Health Hub here on Radio Maria Canada, a Catholic voice wherever you are. To contact us and be a part of the show, email thh@radiomaria.ca. We now continue with the program. Here once again is your host, Kathy Biasi.
Welcome back to the Health Hub. We were talking with Julia Blackwell, and we're going to continue on in the conversation about fascia health, because I truly think this is an untapped area of health, of physicality, of longevity, actually. We need to be able to move, to have that longevity. Movement is key. And so when you're constraining and your fascia is tight and it's tight around everything, it does impact longevity. But there's an area that you deal with when we're talking about fascia that I find extremely interesting, and that's the impact of stress on fascia. And we're not just talking here about physical stress, we're talking about mental stress. So I would love for you to enlighten us about how our mental health impacts our fascia.
Sure, yes. I love talking about this because, we often forget what an impact our emotional and mental well-being has on our body. So we touched on this earlier, which is that fascia can communicate within itself. It has its own system of communication outside of the nervous system. Now they work together and they're certainly communicating back and forth with each other, but the reason that fascia can do so much communication is the vast amount of proprioceptors and free nerve endings that are in our fascia. So most of us know proprioceptors as the things that help us keep our balance. You know, you can stand on one leg and it might be pretty easy, but if you close your eyes and all your proprioceptors have to start kicking in, suddenly you're moving around like wild and you're trying to figure out where your body is in space. That is what it does, right? It helps with our balance, our coordination, our force, our direction, spatial awareness. But ultimately, those things are taking in constant data about everything in both our external and our internal environment. So, in other words, we could say that proprioceptors are how we understand the world around us, and then how our bodies and how we as people fit into that world. And so if your internal environment is very stressed, very anxious, maybe you have some PTSD, things like that, it's going to communicate to the fascia that there's some kind of unsafe or threat detected. And your fascia and your nervous system likely is going to respond based on that threat that's detected. Your body actually can't tell the difference, or I should say, your brain can't tell the difference between what's a real threat, like you're running for your life or you just crashed your mountain bike, and what's a perceived threat. And a perceived threat is likely going to be that internal stress and anxiety. So all of that information of those feelings you have on the inside, all of your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts, that information is being interpreted by the proprioceptors and your fascia is responding. So fascia tends to contract when it believes that it's under attack or that there's a threat. That goes back to another thing we talked about. One of the roles of fascia is to protect us, to help absorb shock. So essentially our body is preparing to brace for an impact that never comes. If we're continually stressed, no impact is really happening to our body, right? But fascia does not realize that, and it's going to contract in order to protect you. So you may find, maybe you're not an athlete, maybe, you don't necessarily have any idea why you have chronic back pain or shoulder pain or knee pain. It could be based on the amount of internal anxiety and stress you have. You may not feel that your muscles are tight necessarily, but that doesn't mean fascia isn't stuck in a contracted state. They've done studies with people on PTSD, and fascia actually gets thicker and more dense over time with PTSD because of that anxiety and fear. The fascia will get stuck in that contracted state and start to thicken. So it really does make a big impact on how well you can move, or possibly with chronic pain that you're experiencing. Absolutely.
Okay, this may, in my mind, this begs the question. So with mental health and the gut, we know that there's a back and forth connection. Is it a stretch to say that if you take care of the health of your fascia, it can have positive impact on your mental health? Does it work in that direction? Is it a biodirectional relationship?
Absolutely. I've seen, at least in my office, when I'm physically working on people, I've seen people have a lot of emotional releases. They have no idea why they're crying, or why they suddenly feel angry, or why they suddenly thought of an experience. But working on fascia is working through some of this stress that's being trapped in our tissue. And as I like to teach, we want to be breathing really deeply and stimulating our parasympathetic nervous system when we do fascia release as much as possible. That's going to start to shift your mental state as well. The more we can be in that parasympathetic nervous system state, or the down-regulated state in our nervous system, the more it's going to impact your mental health for sure.
And this just goes to show, in my estimation, there is not a single thing in the human body that does not work interactively with everything else. And it's a beautiful thing. And the more we can dive into this, for me, it's just so important. We used to pigeonhole what health is. And now with people like you broadening our understanding, There's so many different avenues that we can improve our health. I think it's just a wonderful thing and a wonderful area of knowledge that we can be very, very impactful in.
Yeah.
Sorry, you
sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I thank you. I really hope it's my mission to help bring this to people who think that they're stuck with a limitation or pain because whoever they've been seeing has really been focusing just on the symptom or the site of pain. It's so imperative to look at the whole body and look at these systems that are interconnecting with everything else. Fascia is the only system that touches all of the other ones. Being able to look at the body more holistically, I kind of hate that term. It's being very overused, but like looking at the body overall.
In an integrative space.
Yes, like seeing how everything connects to itself. It opens a lot of doors and gives people the possibilities of answers for whatever they're experiencing.
It's so true. We do have to talk about here now the therapy involved. And it's, as you mentioned, as you intimated earlier on, there is a level of discomfort that fascia therapy involves. So I think knowing that ahead of time might be a great idea. But, walk us through your person coming through the door and you're going to work on an area of fascia release with it. Or do you work on just one area? Do you work on the whole body?
It depends on the person and what their alignment looks like, what pain they're experiencing, but I am working on pretty large areas. I'm rarely honed in and focused on one. But whether I'm working with someone in person at my office or I'm helping someone from afar, virtually or through one of my foam rolling programs, I'm following the same principles of fascia release. So because of that protector element of our fascia, which is contracting to brace for any unexpected impact that we might have, it doesn't change easily. We really have to go in a specific way in order to get fascia to understand that it's safe and acceptable to change. And this is how we interrupt these poor movement patterns or this restriction. And it's a combination of three things. So number one is compression. Fascia loves to be compressed. Number two is some kind of a cross fibering. So that just means going perpendicular to the way fascial fibers run, or more easy to understand would be the way muscle fibers run, at least for a more broader conceptual aspect here. And
is it always along the muscle fiber?
So if you really zoom in microscopically on fascia, it's a bunch of crisscrossing fibers, like a very elaborate spider web. So technically any direction that you're moving is going to cross fiber a little bit of an area, but especially with foam rolling, I think it's easier to imagine that you're going across from the muscle fiber direction. So your quad, for example, runs from the pelvis down to the knee, up and down like that. So we want to go across the quad from the inside to the outside in order to cross fiber. Hopefully
so a T, your leg is one and then the T crosses it.
Yes.
Okay.
And then the last element is active movement. And 2 and 3 can kind of be combined. So if you're actively moving, you're likely going to be cross fibering in some way, mostly focused on that T that we were just talking about. But the active movement is so important to engage the brain and the nervous system. Most of us have gotten used to certain ways of moving or working around restrictions we have. We could also call that compensation patterns. And we want to remind the body that it has access to these range of motions again, that it's safe to go through those ranges of motion again. And there's something it's like this weird factor I can't quite name yet. There's something magical about you doing the movement yourself instead of someone else doing it to you that just helps change things really quickly. So if you're getting one of those elements, say you're just laying on a massage ball and doing the compression, or you're getting a massage and they're going along the muscle fibers, you're getting that compression, it's still going to change fascia over time. But the quickest way, the most efficient way, is when you combine those three things. So whether I'm working on someone in person, I'm going to compress their fascia and talk them through a range of motion. Or if I'm going to guide them through how to foam roll or release fascia with a certain tool, it's the same. I'm going to have them compress somewhere and then actively move through that range of motion.
How long would you say? I mean, I guess everyone's different and depends on the degree of, I guess, the injury and so forth. It never ends though, does it? Taking care of your fascia. But would you say for someone who has arthritis, that been dealing with it for years, let's say, what's the time frame approximately? We're talking years? Are we talking a couple of therapy sessions? What would you say would be, on the radar for someone looking to change?
So I've found that there's a correlation between how long you've been experiencing this thing and how long it takes to unwind. So if you've been dealing with back pain for 30 years, I find it takes a little bit longer to undo all of the compensation patterns and the tension that's been building for that long. Whereas if you can tackle a pain right when it comes up, it can go away so fast. I can't tell you how many times I've woken up with some neck stiffness, or maybe my knee hurts a little bit. If I foam roll that day, it's gone. So it really depends on how quickly you can attack it. Maybe attack is a very intense word, but
well, this therapy is intense.
You can address it. Yeah.
Attack is good.
But even for someone who's been dealing with 30 years of chronic pain, I usually see results with people in a couple of weeks.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Because, you do have to, as you mentioned, overcome that neurological laneway that you've created for yourself. And that, I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in other people. Just that neurological pattern outside of, limitations of the fascia might take some time, like a limp. A limp is so... I'll give you, for instance, because I'm just going through it with my husband now. He's hurt his knee, tore his quad tendon, and has had surgery and everything. And there's no pain. He's getting a lot of range of motion. But every once in a while, I see him limping. And does it hurt? Is it, and he said, I don't know. And then he'll straighten up and start to walk in a better pattern. It's so easy, that compensation pattern. And that to me would be maybe what the longest part of this whole process is, maybe.
Yeah, it's a really incredible thing that our body does. But it also has that negative impact when we let it go too long. So for example, we've all likely had a moment where we woke up and suddenly, let's just say your knee was hurting, since that's our general topic. And you're like, that's weird. I don't know why my knee's hurting today. And so you just push through and you figure, well, hey, my body's going to figure it out. And maybe after a week, it goes away. And in most of our minds, we say, great, that was a weird pain that I have. It's gone. I'm good. But the reality is your body figured out a way to bypass whatever pattern was creating that pain. So you now have a compensation pattern that you likely don't even know that you had. Now, let's say that's happened 6-7 times over the course of 10 years. And then one day you just absolutely cannot get rid of this sciatica. What we don't realize is we've had these compensation patterns building and building and building over time. Unless you've had a car accident or, a mountain bike crash or an actual acute injury, most things that you're feeling in your body have been the accumulation of months or years of time where fascia started getting restricted and pulling bones out of alignment and creating more compensation patterns. And then suddenly we have pain. So I've heard that so many times with the back, right? Someone comes in and they say, oh, it was just one time I bent down to tie my shoe and my back went out. I don't know what I did that one time. And I was like, well, it was probably thousands of times.
The wrong movement. Yep.
Absolutely. So, the compensation patterns build, but they can also be undone. Although for someone who really wants to be on this journey and they have had pain for 30 years or a really long time, you might find that you have other things kind of pop up as you're releasing fascia. One day you might be like, oh, that's weird. I've been working on my shoulder, but my hip kind of hurts today, or my knee kind of hurts. It's because you're unwinding your body back to its original position. You might feel things that you're like, oh yeah, I had this pain 5 years ago, and I'm suddenly reminded it's here. It's a really fascinating process, and one that I highly recommend you stick it out, because those things are very temporary when you continue to release fascia. And then yes, you can unwind it back to as close to the original state as possible.
So one of the things that you talked about before was doing your own work. It's a much better for you in the fascia space. It's much better, in your opinion, for us to do our own work. So does that mean that accessing you and what you do over the internet or through a Zoom call is as appropriate as seeing you in person?
Yeah, you can do both. I found that when you're doing fascia release on your own with a foam roller, it takes a little bit longer than if you were to come see me in person, where I can add a significant amount of weight, more so than you can add with the foam roller, but it still works. So I shared at the beginning of this podcast, I've gotten rid of my own bouts of back pain, neck pain, knee pain on my own, just working with the foam roller. I think where it helps to get an opinion is where we feel pain is rarely the root cause. And so I'm here to help look at alignment, do some assessments, and tell you where the area is that you need to release. Because just because you have knee pain doesn't mean that the issue isn't in your hip or in the opposite shoulder. There is likely something further up the chain or in an area you think is completely unrelated that's having a huge impact on the spot that you're actually feeling pain.
Julie, I think you probably had hit a lot of people with some aha moments. And this is like precisely what we try to do here on the show, opening up a new space for people to investigate when they're trying to improve their health. If people wanted to reach out to you, to work with you, or find out more about your work, where would you direct them?
The best place to go would be movementbyjulia.com. That's Julia. You can find information on how to either work with me one-on-one or see the types of foam rolling programs I have available as well. If you're really itching to try the type of foam rolling I've been describing, there is a free Unlock Your Hips video series that you can sign up for to give it a go and feel the difference for yourself.
I really want to thank you so much for being on the show today. I've learned a lot myself. And everybody, I hope this has enlightened you as much as it has enlightened me. So thank you so much for being with us today, Julia.
Thanks so much, Kathy.
Everybody, we will talk to you next week on The Health Hub.
You have been listening to The Health Hub, hosted by Kathy Biasi, here on Radio Maria Canada.